You are listening to Crazy HOA Life. She tried to find me for a guest pass. I am standing in my own driveway in Quebec City when Kathleen Garcia starts yelling at me about a guest pass I know I displayed correctly, and she is holding a boot clamp like it is a trophy. My name is not important, but my job is. I work as a city permit tech, which means I spend 40 hours a week reviewing permit applications, checking compliance paperwork, and explaining to angry homeowners what does and does not require a city permit. I moved to Whispering Pines Landing 6 months ago because I needed something affordable close to the municipal office, and the master-planned community looked clean and quiet in the photos. What the listing did not mention was that parking rules here are treated like sacred law, and Kathleen, the architectural committee chair, enforces them with the zeal of a prosecutor at a war crimes tribunal. Right now, she is waving a clipboard in my face and telling me my guest pass was never displayed, which is a lie, because I put it on the dashboard myself yesterday afternoon when my friend came over to help me move a couch. The pass was there when I left for work this morning. It was there when I got home 20 minutes ago, but when I walked out to grab my lunch cooler from the truck, I found the pass moved to the passenger seat and Kathleen standing next to my rear wheel with a boot clamp already half closed around the tire. She is wearing a gray cardigan over a pink blouse, a red bucket hat that looks like she stole it from a vacation photo, and she has a small key safe box clipped to her belt that she keeps tapping like it is a badge of authority. She tells me the pass was not visible from the street, so the violation stands, and the boot stays on until I pay the $50 fine plus the $75 boot removal fee. I tell her I displayed the pass correctly, and someone must have moved it. She laughs and says that is what they all say. Her exact words are, "You think this is petty, I think this is my purpose." She says it with this smug little smile, like she has been waiting all week to drop that line on someone. I feel my jaw tighten, but I keep my voice level. I ask her who moved the pass, because it did not move itself. She tells me it is my responsibility to secure the pass, and if it falls or gets moved, that is on me. I point out that the pass has a static cling backing and does not just fall off glass, and she waves the clipboard again and says the rules are the rules. I take a breath and remind myself that I work with angry people all day, and I know how to stay calm when someone is trying to bait me into losing my temper. I tell Kathleen I want to see the written rule that says a pass moved by someone else counts as a violation. She blinks, and for half a second I see the smile crack. Then she tells me the rule is in the parking addendum, section 4, paragraph 2, and I can look it up myself. I pull out my phone and open the HOA documents I downloaded when I moved in, and I scroll to section 4. The rule says passes must be clearly visible from outside the vehicle. It does not say anything about who is responsible if the pass gets moved. I show her the screen, and she tells me I am twisting the language. I tell her I read compliance documents for a living, and the language says what it says. She taps the key safe box on her belt and tells me that if I do not like the rules, I can take it up with the board at the next meeting. Then she kneels down and finishes closing the boot clamp with a metallic click that echoes off the garage door. I feel a spike of anger, but I swallow it and focus on the facts. The boot is on. The pass was moved. Kathleen is smiling. And my work vehicle is now stuck in my own driveway, which means if I get called out for a site inspection tomorrow, I am going to have to explain why I am late. My work depends on being able to park a work vehicle, and the HOA is targeting it. That is the stake here. If I lose access to my truck, I lose my ability to do my job, and if I lose my job, I lose the house. I tell Kathleen I am not paying the fine, because the violation is based on a pass that was moved by someone else. She tells me that is my opinion, and her opinion is that I was non-compliant. Then she stands up, brushes off her knees, and tells me the boot comes off when I pay. I ask her who the tow vendor is, and she tells me that is HO business, not mine. I ask her if the vendor is licensed by the city, and she tells me I can ask them myself when they come to collect the boot tomorrow, if I have not paid by then. Then she walks away, and I am left standing in my driveway with a boot clamp on my wheel and a guest pass, sitting on the passenger seat like evidence in a trial I did not know I was having. I go inside and sit down at the kitchen table with my phone and my laptop. My friend who helped me move the couch yesterday is named Eric, and he works at the courthouse downtown. I call him and explain what just happened, and he listens without interrupting. When I finish, he tells me to document everything. He tells me to take photos of the boot, the pass, the driveway, and the clipboard if I can get close enough. He tells me to check if the HOA has the legal authority to boot vehicles on private property, because in some jurisdictions, that is considered a form of unlawful detention. He also tells me to find out if the tow vendor has a city contract, because if they are operating without proper licensing, the city can shut them down. I thank him and hang up, and then I go back outside with my phone. The boot is still there, yellow metal with a bright orange warning tag, zip-tied to the clamp. The tag has printed text, but I do not read it out loud, because it is just legalese about removal fees and contact numbers. I take photos from 4 angles, making sure the pass is visible on the passenger seat in the background of 2 shots. Then I walk around the truck and take photos of the driveway, the curb, and the street sign at the corner that marks the guest parking zone. My phone storage is almost full, and I realize I need to back up this video evidence before it gets lost. I go inside and plug the phone into my laptop, and I start copying the photos to a cloud folder I label HOA evidence. While the photos upload, I open the HOA documents again and search for the word boot. I find it in Section 6, under Enforcement Procedures. The rule says the HOA can authorize a licensed towing and immobilization vendor to boot vehicles that are parked in violation of community standards for more than 24 hours. I check the timestamp on the pass. It was issued yesterday at 3 in the afternoon, which means the vehicle has been parked here for less than 24 hours. I screenshot the rule and the timestamp, and I add them to the evidence folder. Then I look up the city regulations for towing and immobilization services. The municipal code says any vendor providing towing or immobilization services within city limits must hold a valid city towing permit and must display the permit number on all enforcement notices. I walk back outside and look at the orange warning tag on the boot. There is no permit number. I take another photo, zooming in on the blank space where the permit number should be. Then I go back inside and draft an email to the HOA board. I keep it short and factual. I explain that the boot was applied less than 24 hours after the alleged violation, which violates the HOA's own enforcement timeline. I explain that the warning tag does not display a city towing permit number, which violates municipal code. I attach the photos and the screenshots, and I CC Eric so he has a copy for his records. I hit send, and then I sit back and wait. The next morning, I wake up to 3 new emails. The first is from Kathleen, sent at 6 in the morning. She tells me the board has reviewed my complaint and determined that the boot was applied in accordance with HOA policy. She tells me the 24-hour rule applies to repeat offenders, and since I received a written warning 2 months ago for parking my work truck in the driveway overnight, I am classified as a repeat offender. She tells me the boot will be removed when I pay the fine and the removal fee, and if I do not pay within 48 hours, the vehicle will be towed to a contracted lot and I will be responsible for storage fees. I do not remember receiving a written warning 2 months ago. I check my email archives and my mail pile, and I find nothing. I reply to Kathleen and ask her to send me a copy of the written warning, including the date it was issued and the method of delivery. I also ask her to provide the name and city permit number of the contracted tow vendor. I keep the tone polite but firm, and I CC the entire board. The second email is from Eric. He tells me he looked up the city towing permit database, and he found only 2 vendors with active permits in my zip code. He sends me their names and permit numbers, and he tells me to check if the HOA's vendor is on the list. If the vendor is not on the list, I can file a complaint with the City Transportation Department, and they can issue a cease and desist order. He also tells me to check if the HOA has a policy for handling disputes, because most HOAs are required to offer mediation or arbitration before they can proceed with enforcement actions like towing or liens. The third email is from my neighbor across the street, a retired teacher named Paula. She tells me she saw Kathleen and another woman standing next to my truck yesterday afternoon around 2, and she took photos because she thought it looked suspicious. She attaches 3 photos. In the first photo, Kathleen is standing next to the passenger door with the door open. In the second photo, the other woman is reaching inside the truck. In the third photo, both women are walking away, and the guest pass is no longer visible on the dashboard. Paula tells me she did not think much of it at the time, but after she saw the boot clamp this morning, she wanted me to know what she saw. She also tells me the other woman is named Susan, and she is on the compliance committee with Kathleen. I stare at the photos for a long time. The lighting in all 3 shots is identical, bright midday sun casting short shadows, which matches the timeline I remember. The timestamp on the photos is 2:15 in the afternoon, which is about 15 minutes before I got home. I forward the email to Eric with a note that says, "They moved the pass themselves." He replies within minutes and tells me that if I can prove the HOA tampered with the pass to create a violation, that is fraud, and I can file a police report. I call the non-emergency police line and explain the situation. The dispatcher listens and tells me to come down to the station and file a report. I tell her I have a boot clamp on my truck and I cannot drive it. She tells me to take an Uber, and she gives me a case number to reference when I arrive. I thank her and hang up, and then I call Eric and ask him if he can give me a ride to the station. He tells me he is working from home today, but he can pick me up in 20 minutes. While I wait, I go outside and take more photos of the boot. I also take photos of the street and the driveway from the angles that match Paula's shots, so I can show the police the timeline. A car pulls up across the street, and I see a man in a reflective vest get out and walk toward my driveway. He is carrying a handheld plate scanner, the kind that tow vendors use to log vehicles before they hook them up. He holds it low with the screen turned away, and he does not look at me. He walks up to the rear bumper, scans the plate, and then turns around and walks back to his car. I call out and ask him what company he works for, but he ignores me and drives away. I take a photo of his car, including the license plate and the company logo on the door. The logo says Pine City Towing in small letters, and there is a phone number below it. I text the photo to Eric and ask him to check if Pine City Towing is on the city permit list. He replies a minute later and tells me it is not. He tells me Pine City Towing had a permit 2 years ago, but it was revoked after multiple complaints about predatory towing practices. He tells me if the HOA is using an unlicensed vendor, that is a violation of municipal code, and the city can fine the HOA and the vendor. Eric arrives, and I get in his car. On the way to the police station, I show him Paula's photos and the photo of the tow vendor. He tells me this is bigger than I thought. He tells me if the HOA is working with an unlicensed vendor and creating fake violations to justify towing, that is organized fraud, and the city will take it seriously. He also tells me that I should file a complaint with the City Transportation Department as soon as I finish at the police station, because the sooner the city knows about the unlicensed vendor, the sooner they can shut it down. At the police station, I sit down with an officer and explain the situation. I show her Paula's photos, the screenshots of the HOA rules, and the photo of the tow vendor. She listens and takes notes, and then she tells me this is a civil matter between me and the HOA, but the tampering with the guest pass could be considered mischief or fraud. She tells me she will file a report, and if the HOA tries to tow the vehicle, I should call the police immediately and reference the case number. She also tells me to keep all the evidence I have, because if this goes to court, the judge will want to see a clear timeline. I thank her and leave, and Eric drives me back home. When we pull into the driveway, I see Kathleen standing next to my truck again, and this time she has a man with her. He is wearing a reflective vest and holding a wheel lift tow hook. I get out of the car, and Kathleen tells me the 48 hours are up and the vehicle is being towed. I tell her it has been less than 24 hours since she put the boot on, and she tells me I am wrong. She pulls out her phone and shows me a photo of a written warning taped to my front door, dated 2 months ago. The photo is time-stamped, but the timestamp is from this morning. I tell her that is not a photo from 2 months ago, and she tells me I can prove that in court. I pull out my phone and start recording. I tell Kathleen and the tow driver that I have filed a police report for tampering and fraud, and I have evidence that the guest pass was moved by HOA representatives to create a fake violation. I also tell them that Pine City Towing does not have a valid city towing permit, and any vehicle towed by an unlicensed vendor can be recovered without payment under Municipal Code Section 12-4. The tow driver stops and looks at Kathleen. She tells him to ignore me and hook up the truck. He hesitates, and then he pulls out his phone and makes a call. I hear him say something about a police report and a permit issue, and then he listens for a long time. When he hangs up, he tells Kathleen he needs to call his boss before he proceeds. Kathleen tells him the HOA has a contract, and he needs to honor it. He tells her he is not hooking up a vehicle when there is an active police report and a permit dispute. Then, he gets in his truck and drives away. Kathleen turns to me, and her face is red. She tells me I am going to regret this. She tells me the board is going to fine me for obstruction, and they are going to add the fine to my HOA dues, and if I do not pay, they are going to file a lien on the property. I tell her she can try, but I have evidence of fraud and unlicensed towing, and I am going to file complaints with the city, the HOA management company, and the state attorney general. She tells me, your paperwork is cute, mine has a letterhead. Then she walks away, and I am left standing in my driveway with Eric, who is grinning like he just watched the best episode of a courtroom drama. Eric tells me I need to move fast. He tells me Kathleen is going to try to escalate this before I can get the city involved, and I need to get ahead of her. He tells me to file the complaint with the city transportation department today, and then email the HOA management company with the evidence and demand that they remove the boot and reverse the fine. He also tells me to send a letter to every homeowner in the community, because if Kathleen is doing this to me, she is probably doing it to other people, and the more people who know, the harder it will be for her to cover it up. I follow his advice. I spend the rest of the afternoon drafting a complaint to the city transportation department, and I attach Paula's photos, the screenshots, and the photo of the unlicensed tow vendor. I send it via the city's online complaint portal, and I get an automatic reply that says the complaint will be reviewed within 5 business days. Then I draft an email to the HOA management company, and I explain the entire situation from start to finish. I attach all the evidence, and I demand that the boot be removed immediately and the fine be reversed. I also request a copy of the written warning that Kathleen claims was delivered 2 months ago, and I request the name and contact information of the contracted tow vendor. I CC the entire board and Eric, and I hit send. Then I draft a letter to the homeowners. I keep it factual and unemotional, and I explain that the HOA is using an unlicensed tow vendor and creating fake violations to justify fines and towing. I attach Paula's photos and the city permit database screenshot, and I include a link to the municipal code section that requires tow vendors to display valid permits. I explain that if this has happened to anyone else, they should file a complaint with the city and contact the HOA management company. I save the letter as a document, and then I look up the HOA directory and copy every homeowner's email address into a distribution list. I take a breath, and then I hit send. Within an hour, my phone starts buzzing with replies. Some people thank me for bringing this to their attention. Some people tell me they received similar violations in the past and paid the fines without questioning them. Some people tell me they saw Kathleen and Susan tampering with vehicles in the past but did not think it was worth reporting. One person tells me Kathleen tried to have his car towed last year because he parked in a guest spot overnight, and when he complained, she told him the rules were the rules. Another person tells me the HOA switched to Pine City Towing 6 months ago, and the previous vendor was licensed and professional. By the end of the day, I have over 30 replies, and at least 10 people tell me they are planning to attend the next board meeting to demand answers. I also get a reply from the HOA management company. The email is from a regional manager named David, and he tells me he has reviewed my complaint and the attached evidence, and he is launching an internal investigation. He tells me the boot will be removed within 24 hours, and the fine will be reversed pending the outcome of the investigation. He also tells me the board will be required to provide copies of all written warnings and enforcement records related to my property, and if any violations are found, the board will be held accountable. I feel a small sense of relief, but I know this is not over. Kathleen is not the type to back down, and I know she is going to try to retaliate. I just do not know how yet. The next morning, I wake up to find the boot is gone. There is no note, no apology, just an empty driveway and a faint scrape mark on the wheel where the clamp was attached. I check my email, and I see a message from David at the management company. He tells me the boot has been removed, and the fine has been reversed. He also tells me the board held an emergency meeting last night, and they voted to suspend the contract with Pine City Towing, pending a review of the vendor's credentials. He tells me the investigation is ongoing, and he will keep me updated. I also see an email from Kathleen, sent at 5 in the morning. She tells me I have created a hostile environment in the community, and the board is considering a formal complaint against me for harassment and defamation. She tells me my email to the homeowners contained false and misleading information, and I will be required to issue a retraction and apology at the next board meeting. She tells me if I do not comply, the board will pursue legal action. I forward the email to Eric, and he replies within minutes. He tells me this is classic retaliation, and I should not engage. He tells me to keep documenting everything, and if Kathleen files a formal complaint, I should respond through an attorney. He also tells me the next board meeting is in 2 weeks, and I should plan to attend and bring all my evidence. Over the next few days, I start getting more emails from homeowners who want to share their stories. One woman tells me Kathleen had her car towed 3 times in 6 months, always for minor violations like expired guest passes or parking slightly over the line. She tells me she paid over $800 in fines and towing fees before she finally sold her house and moved out. Another man tells me Kathleen tried to have his work van towed because it had a company logo on the side, and she claimed commercial vehicles were not allowed in the community. He tells me he fought the fine and won, but Kathleen made his life miserable for months afterward by filing complaints about his trash cans, his lawn, and his mailbox. I compile all the stories into a single document, and I send it to David at the management company. I also send a copy to Eric, and I ask him if this is enough to justify a formal complaint against Kathleen. He tells me it is more than enough, and I should consider organizing a group of homeowners to file a joint complaint. He tells me if the management company sees that this is a pattern of behavior affecting multiple residents, they will be more likely to take action. I reach out to the homeowners who contacted me, and I ask if they would be willing to sign a joint complaint. Within 2 days, I have 12 signatures, including Paula's. We draft a complaint that outlines Kathleen's pattern of harassment, the use of an unlicensed tow vendor, and the creation of fake violations to justify fines. We attach all the evidence, including photos, emails, and city records. Then we send the complaint to David at the management company, the HOA board, and the city transportation department. David replies the same day. He tells me the complaint has been escalated to the corporate office, and an independent investigator will be assigned to review the case. He tells me the board has been instructed to cease all enforcement actions related to parking violations until the investigation is complete. He also tells me Kathleen has been placed on administrative leave from her role as architectural committee chair, and another board member will handle her duties in the interim. I feel a surge of hope, but I also know Kathleen is not going to take this quietly. I know she is going to try to fight back, and I need to be ready. 2 days before the board meeting, I get a knock on my door. I open it to find a man in a Pine City towing uniform standing on my porch. He tells me he is here to verify my parking compliance, and he needs to inspect my vehicle registration and guest pass records. I tell him I do not have to show him anything, and I ask him to leave. He tells me the HOA has authorized him to conduct a compliance check, and if I do not cooperate, the board will file a formal complaint. I tell him the HOA suspended the contract with Pine City Towing, and he has no authority to be on my property. He tells me he does not know anything about a suspension, and he is just following orders. I pull out my phone and start recording. I tell him I am filing a trespassing complaint, and if he does not leave immediately, I am calling the police. He looks at the phone, and then he looks at me, and then he turns around and walks away. I watch him get in his truck and drive away, and then I call Eric. I tell him what just happened, and he tells me this is escalation step 1. He tells me Kathleen is trying to provoke me into doing something she can use against me at the board meeting. He tells me to stay calm, document everything, and do not engage with anyone from Pine City Towing or the HOA unless it is in writing. I follow his advice, and I send an email to David at the management company describing the incident. I attach the video recording, and I request that the HOA be instructed to stop sending vendors to my property. David replies within an hour and tells me he has contacted the board and reminded them that all enforcement actions are suspended pending the investigation. He tells me if anyone from Pine City Towing or the HOA contacts me again, I should call the police immediately. The next day, I get another email from Kathleen. She tells me the board has reviewed my complaint, and they have determined that the allegations are without merit. She tells me the use of Pine City Towing was authorized by the board, and the vendor's permit status is not relevant because the HOA is a private entity and not subject to city regulations. She also tells me the board has voted to proceed with a formal complaint against me for harassment and defamation, and I will be required to appear at the next board meeting to respond to the charges. I forward the email to Eric, and he tells me this is retaliation, plain and simple. He tells me the HOA is absolutely subject to city regulations when it comes to towing and immobilization, and Kathleen is either lying or she does not understand the law. He also tells me I should bring an attorney to the board meeting, because if the board tries to impose fines or sanctions, I am going to need legal representation. I do not have an attorney, and I do not have the money to hire one on short notice. I tell Eric this, and he tells me he knows someone who does pro bono work for HOA disputes. He gives me a name and a phone number, and he tells me to call her today. I call, and I leave a message explaining the situation. She calls me back an hour later, and we talk for 30 minutes. She tells me she has handled cases like this before, and she thinks I have a strong case. She tells me she can attend the board meeting with me, and if the board tries to impose any fines or sanctions, she will object on the record. She also tells me I should prepare a written statement summarizing the evidence, and I should bring copies for every board member. I spend the next day preparing the statement. I outline the timeline, the evidence, and the complaints from other homeowners. I attach copies of Paula's photos, the city permit database screenshots, and the emails from David at the management company. I print 15 copies, and I put them in a folder. The night before the board meeting, I get a call from an unknown number. I answer, and I hear a woman's voice. She tells me her name is Lisa, and she is the owner of the previous tow vendor that the HOA used before they switched to Pine City Towing. She tells me she heard about my complaint, and she wants me to know that Kathleen pushed the board to switch vendors because Pine City Towing offered her a kickback. She tells me she has emails and invoices that show Pine City Towing paid Kathleen a monthly fee for every vehicle towed from the community. She tells me she tried to report it to the management company a year ago, but the board dismissed her complaint and accused her of slandering Kathleen. I ask her if she still has the emails and invoices, and she tells me she does. I ask her if she would be willing to send them to me, and she tells me she will send them tonight. She also tells me she is planning to file a formal complaint with the state attorney general because what Kathleen is doing is fraud and it is illegal. I thank her and hang up, and then I sit down at my laptop and wait for the email. It arrives an hour later, and I open the attachments. There are 12 emails, all from an address associated with Pine City Towing, and all addressed to Kathleen's personal email. The emails reference monthly payments, tow counts, and fee splits. There are also 6 invoices, all showing payments from Pine City Towing to an account listed under Kathleen's name. The amounts range from $200 to $500 per month, and the invoices span the last 6 months. I stare at the screen for a long time. This is the trump card. This is the evidence that proves Kathleen has been running a kickback scheme with an unlicensed tow vendor, and she has been creating fake violations to increase the tow count and maximize her payments. I forward the email to Eric, and I call him. He picks up on the first ring, and I tell him what I just received. He tells me this is huge, and I need to bring it to the board meeting tomorrow. He also tells me I should send a copy to David at the management company tonight, so the corporate office knows what is coming. I send the email to David, and I CC the attorney. Then I print copies of the emails and invoices, and I add them to the folder with the rest of the evidence. I stared at the violation letter earlier this week and smiled, because it proved exactly what I suspected. The letter referenced a parking rule that does not exist in the HOA bylaws, which meant Kathleen was making up rules to justify fines. Now I have proof that she was not just making up rules, she was making money. The next morning, I wake up early and drive to the community clubhouse where the board meeting is being held. The parking lot is already full, and I see at least 30 people standing outside waiting for the doors to open. I recognize some of them from the email chain, including Paula and the man whose work van Kathleen tried to have towed. Eric is already there, and he waves me over. He tells me the attorney is inside setting up and she wants to meet with me before the meeting starts. I go inside, and I see the attorney sitting at a table near the front of the room. Her name is Rachel, and she is younger than I expected, maybe early 30s, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. She tells me she reviewed the evidence I sent, and she thinks we have a strong case. She tells me the kickback emails are the key, because they show intent and a pattern of fraudulent behavior. She also tells me the board is going to try to shut me down before I can present the evidence, so I need to be ready to object and demand that the evidence be entered into the meeting minutes. The meeting starts at 7, and the room is packed. There are at least 50 people in the audience, and the board members are sitting at a long table at the front of the room. Kathleen is sitting at the far left, and she is wearing the same gray cardigan and red bucket hat. She has the small key safe box clipped to her belt, and she is holding a clipboard. The board president, a man named Tom, calls the meeting to order and reads through the agenda. The last item on the agenda is the complaint against me for harassment and defamation. When Tom gets to my complaint, he asks me to come forward and present my case. I walk to the front of the room, and Rachel stands up and introduces herself as my legal representative. Tom looks annoyed, but he tells me to proceed. I pull out the folder and start handing out copies of the evidence to the board members. Kathleen interrupts and tells Tom that I am wasting the board's time, and the complaint against me should be heard first. Tom tells her to be quiet, and he tells me to continue. I start with the timeline. I explain that the guest pass was moved by HOA representatives to create a fake violation, and I have photos from a neighbor that show Kathleen and Susan tampering with the pass. I explain that the boot was applied less than 24 hours after the alleged violation, which violates the HOA's own enforcement timeline. I explain that Pine City Towing does not have a valid city towing permit, and the use of an unlicensed vendor violates municipal code. Then I pause, and I look at Kathleen. She is staring at me with her arms crossed, and her face is red. I pull out the emails and invoices from Lisa, and I explain that I received evidence showing Kathleen has been receiving kickback payments from Pine City Towing for every vehicle towed from the community. I hand out copies of the emails and invoices to the board members, and I watch their faces change as they read. Tom looks stunned. Another board member, a woman named Carol, looks horrified. Kathleen stands up and tells me I am lying, and the emails are fake. I tell her the emails are real, and they are time-stamped and verifiable. I also tell her I have filed a complaint with the state attorney general, and they will be conducting their own investigation. Rachel stands up and tells the board that the evidence shows a clear pattern of fraud and self-dealing, and the board has a fiduciary duty to investigate and take action. She also tells the board that if they fail to take action, the homeowners have the right to file a lawsuit against the HOA and the individual board members for breach of fiduciary duty. Tom looks at Kathleen, and then he looks at Carol, and then he tells me to sit down while the board deliberates. The board goes into a closed session, and the rest of us wait in the audience. People are whispering and pointing at Kathleen, and I see a few people taking photos with their phones. Paula leans over and tells me she knew Kathleen was corrupt, but she did not think she was this corrupt. Eric tells me this is going better than he expected, and he thinks the board is going to have no choice but to act. After 20 minutes, the board comes back, and Tom tells the room that the board has voted to suspend Kathleen from all HOA duties pending the outcome of the investigation. He also tells the room that the board is terminating the contract with Pine City Towing effective immediately, and all fines and fees related to Pine City Towing enforcement actions will be refunded. He tells the room that the board will be hiring an independent auditor to review all HOA financial records, and the results of the audit will be shared with the homeowners. Kathleen stands up and tells Tom that he does not have the authority to suspend her, and she is going to file a lawsuit against the board and me for defamation. Tom tells her to sit down, and he tells her that if she does not cooperate with the investigation, the board will move to remove her from the board entirely. Kathleen grabs her clipboard and her small key safe box, and she storms out of the room. The audience erupts in applause, and I see people hugging and high-fiving. But the meeting is not over. Tom tells the room that the board is scheduling a special meeting in 2 weeks to discuss the findings of the audit and to vote on new policies to prevent this from happening again. He also tells the room that any homeowner who paid fines or fees to Pine City Towing in the last 6 months should submit a refund request to the management company. Then he adjourns the meeting, and people start filing out of the room. Rachel tells me I did a great job, and she thinks the board is going to have no choice but to remove Kathleen. She also tells me I should expect retaliation, and I should be prepared to file a restraining order if Kathleen tries to contact me or harass me. I thank her, and I tell her I will stay in touch. Eric and I walk out to the parking lot, and we see Kathleen standing next to her car, talking on her phone. She sees me, and she hangs up and walks over. She tells me I have ruined her life, and she is going to make sure I pay for it. I tell her I did not ruin her life. She ruined it herself by committing fraud. She tells me, "Your paperwork is cute. Mine has a letterhead." I tell her that her letterhead does not protect her from criminal charges, and she should talk to a lawyer. She stares at me for a long moment, and then she gets in her car and drives away. Eric tells me that was the boomerang line, and it just came back to bite her. I laugh, and I feel a weight lift off my shoulders. The next morning, I get a call from David at the management company. He tells me the corporate office has completed its preliminary review, and they have determined that Kathleen violated multiple HOA policies and state laws. He tells me the board is moving forward with a formal removal vote at the special meeting, and they expect the vote to pass. He also tells me the refund process has started, and I should receive my refund within 2 weeks. He thanks me for bringing this to their attention, and he tells me the community is better off without Kathleen in a leadership role. I also get an email from Lisa, the previous tow vendor. She tells me the state attorney general has opened an investigation into Pine City Towing and Kathleen, and they are requesting financial records from both parties. She tells me she has been asked to provide testimony, and she is happy to do it. She also tells me she has been contacted by several other HOA communities that used Pine City Towing, and they are all filing complaints. Over the next 2 weeks, I get updates from other homeowners who are filing refund requests. The total amount of refunds being processed is over $15,000, which means Pine City Towing and Kathleen have been running this scheme for a long time. The board hires an independent auditor, and the auditor finds that Kathleen approved over 300 towing and booting actions in the last year, and almost half of them were for minor or questionable violations. The special meeting is held on a Saturday morning, and the room is packed again. Tom starts the meeting by presenting the audit findings, and he tells the room that the board has voted unanimously to remove Kathleen from the board and to ban her from holding any HOA leadership position in the future. He also tells the room that the board is implementing new policies to prevent this from happening again. The new policies require all enforcement actions to be approved by at least 2 board members, and all tow vendors must be licensed by the city and must provide proof of insurance. The board is also requiring all written warnings to be delivered by certified mail with a tracking number, so there is no dispute about whether a warning was received. Tom then opens the floor for public comment, and I raise my hand. I walk to the front of the room, and I tell the board that I appreciate the actions they have taken, but I think the community deserves more transparency. I tell the board that the HOA must publish standards and timelines to all homeowners, so everyone knows what the rules are and how they will be enforced. I also tell the board that the refund process should include interest for anyone who paid fees to Pine City Towing, because those fees were collected fraudulently. Several other homeowners stand up and echo my comments, and the board agrees to add both items to the next meeting agenda. Tom then calls for a vote to approve the new policies, and the motion passes unanimously. Then, he calls for a vote to remove Kathleen from the board, and the motion passes with only 1 dissenting vote. The dissenting vote comes from Susan, the woman who helped Kathleen move the guest pass. Someone in the audience yells that Susan should be removed too, and the room erupts in laughter and applause. Kathleen is outvoted so hard the room laughs, and I see Susan sink down in her chair and stare at the table. Tom adjourns the meeting, and people start filing out. Eric tells me this is the best possible outcome, and he thinks the community is going to be a lot better now that Kathleen is gone. Rachel tells me I should expect a formal apology from the board, and she thinks I have a strong case if I want to file a lawsuit for the harassment and the fraudulent fines. I tell her I am going to wait and see how the refund process goes, and if the board follows through on the new policies, I will consider the matter closed. A few days later, I get another email from David at the management company. He tells me the refund has been processed, and I should see the money in my account within 5 business days. He also tells me the board has issued a formal apology to me and to all the homeowners who were affected by Kathleen's actions. The apology is attached to the email, and it is signed by Tom and the rest of the board. I also get an email from the City Transportation Department. The email tells me the complaint I filed has been reviewed, and the city has issued a cease and desist order to Pine City Towing. The order prohibits Pine City Towing from operating within city limits until they obtain a valid towing permit and resolve all outstanding complaints. The email also tells me the city has fined Pine City Towing $5,000 for operating without a permit, and the fine will be used to reimburse homeowners who paid fees to the company. A week later, I get a call from an unknown number. I answer, and I hear a man's voice. He tells me his name is John, and he is the owner of Pine City Towing. He tells me he is shutting down the company, and he is filing for bankruptcy. He also tells me he was never paid by Kathleen, and the kickback emails were fake. I tell him I have seen the invoices, and they show payments from his company to Kathleen's account. He tells me Kathleen forged the invoices, and he is planning to sue her for fraud. Then he hangs up. If you are enjoying this story, please like and subscribe for more HOA chaos. I do not know if John is telling the truth, but I do not care. Pine City Towing is done, and Kathleen is facing criminal charges. The community is moving on, and the new board is committed to transparency and accountability. A month after the special meeting, I get a knock on my door. I open it to find Tom standing on my porch. He tells me the board wants to thank me for bringing the fraud to their attention, and they want to offer me a position on the architectural committee. I tell him I appreciate the offer, but I am not interested in HOA leadership. I tell him I just want to park my truck in my driveway and go to work without worrying about fake violations and unlicensed tow vendors. He laughs and tells me he understands, and the offer is open if I change my mind. I also get an email from Paula, my neighbor across the street. She tells me Kathleen moved out of the community last week and the house is up for sale. She tells me the realtor is having a hard time selling it because word has gotten out about the fraud and buyers are worried about the HOA. She also tells me Susan resigned from the compliance committee and the board is recruiting new members. Over the next few months, the community starts to feel different. The new board holds monthly open forums where homeowners can ask questions and voice concerns. The enforcement actions drop by over 70%, and the few actions that are taken are for serious violations like cars blocking fire lanes or trash left on the curb for weeks. The gatehouse traffic jams are gone because the new board eliminated the guest pass requirement and replaced it with a simple call-in system where residents can notify the gate attendant when they are expecting visitors. I also hear from other homeowners who were affected by Kathleen's scheme. One woman tells me she received a refund of $1,200, and she used the money to replace her water heater. Another man tells me he received a refund of $800, and he donated it to a legal aid fund for homeowners fighting HOA disputes. I receive a refund of $125, which covers the boot removal fee and the fine. I deposit the check, and I use the money to buy a dash cam for my truck, just in case. The State Attorney General's investigation takes 6 months, and the results are released to the public in a press release. The press release states that Kathleen Garcia and Pine City Towing engaged in a fraudulent scheme to generate illegal revenue through fake parking violations and kickback payments. Kathleen is charged with fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. Pine City Towing is fined an additional $10,000, and the owner is charged with operating without a license and conspiracy. Both cases are pending trial. I also hear from Lisa, the previous tow vendor. She tells me the Attorney General's office has contacted her, and they are using her testimony as part of the case against Kathleen and Pine City Towing. She also tells me she is starting a new business consulting with HOAs on ethical towing practices, and she is using my case as an example of what can go wrong when boards prioritize revenue over fairness. Eric tells me I should write a book about this, and I tell him I am happy to let someone else tell the story. He tells me I should at least write a letter to the local newspaper, because other communities need to know that HOA fraud is real and it can be stopped. I think about it for a few days, and then I decide he is right. I write a short letter to the editor describing what happened, and I encourage other homeowners to document everything, ask questions, and demand transparency from their HOA boards. The letter is published a week later, and I get emails from people all over the city thanking me and telling me their own HOA horror stories. A year after the board meeting, I get an email from Tom. He tells me the new board has completed a full review of the HOA policies, and they have eliminated over half of the enforcement rules. The rules that remain are focused on safety and property maintenance, not on petty violations like guest pass placement or overnight parking. He also tells me the community has saved over $20,000 in enforcement costs, and the savings have been used to repave the streets and upgrade the playground. I also get an email from Rachel, my attorney. She tells me Kathleen's trial has been scheduled, and the prosecutor expects a guilty verdict. She tells me I may be called to testify, and she will help me prepare if that happens. I tell her I am ready, and I hope the trial brings closure for all the homeowners who were affected. In the end, the case against Kathleen is resolved with a plea deal. She pleads guilty to fraud and embezzlement, and she is sentenced to 2 years of probation and ordered to pay restitution to the HOA and the affected homeowners. She is also banned from serving on any HOA board or committee for 10 years. Pine City Towing is fined an additional $15,000, and the owner is sentenced to 6 months of home detention. The restitution payments are distributed over the next year, and I receive a check for $250, which covers the original fine, the boot removal fee, and interest. I deposit the check, and I use the money to take Eric out to dinner to thank him for his help. He tells me he is proud of me for standing up to Kathleen, and he thinks the community is a better place because of it. I also hear from Paula, who tells me the house across the street finally sold, and the new owners are a young couple with a toddler. She tells me they are friendly and quiet, and they do not cause any trouble. She also tells me the compliance committee has been disbanded, and the board now handles enforcement actions directly. As I sit on my porch and watch the neighborhood, I think about how much has changed in the last year. The boot clamp is gone, the tow threats are gone, and Kathleen is gone. The community is quieter, friender, and more focused on the things that actually matter. I think about the statute citation read into the minutes that shuts the threat down, the way the room erupted in laughter when Kathleen was outvoted, and the way the new board published standards and timelines to all homeowners so everyone knows the rules. I think about the handheld plate scanner held low with the screen turned away, the small key safe box Kathleen insisted belonged to the HOA, and the reflective armband on my sleeve that I still wear when I do site inspections. I think about the moment when I stared at the violation letter and smiled, because it proved exactly what I suspected. I think about the invoice trail showing suspicious kickbacks to an HOA vendor, and the way Kathleen repeated her claim one last time, on record, right before I showed the proof. I think about the funny karma moment when Karen quoted minutes and the actual minutes contradicted her, and the way the room laughed when she was outvoted so hard her face turned red. And I think about the lessons I learned. I learned that HOAs can be corrupt, but they can also be held accountable. I learned that documentation is everything, and that transparency is the best defense against abuse. I learned that standing up to bullies is hard, but it is worth it. And I learned that sometimes the best way to fight back is to follow the rules, gather the evidence, and let the truth do the talking. The special meeting that turned into a recall vote was the turning point. Resignations cascaded after Kathleen was removed, and new leadership took over before the next project got targeted. The new board members are younger, more tech-savvy, and more focused on community building than rule enforcement. They have implemented an online portal where homeowners can track enforcement actions, submit complaints, and vote on policy changes. They have also hired a new management company that specializes in ethical HOA practices and has a track record of transparency and accountability. The Gatehouse Lane traffic jam scene, where Kathleen blocked cars with her clipboard and everyone started honking, is now a legend in the community. People still talk about it at neighborhood barbecues and block parties, and someone even made a meme out of a photo that was taken during the jam. The meme shows Kathleen standing in the middle of the lane with her clipboard raised, and the caption says, "When you think parking rules are more important than traffic flow." The tow company owner call scene, where the owner heard Kathleen's threat on speaker and told the driver to stand down, is also a favorite story. Eric tells it whenever someone asks him about the case, and he always ends it by saying, "That was the moment we knew we had her." The fact that the tow driver refused to hook up the truck because he heard the police report and the permit issue on speaker was the first crack in Kathleen's armor, and it gave us the time we needed to gather the rest of the evidence. The witness type that made all the difference was someone peeking through blinds like it was a show. Paula's photos from across the street were the key to proving that Kathleen and Susan moved the guest pass, and without those photos, the case would have been a lot harder to prove. I still thank Paula every time I see her, and she always tells me she was happy to help. She also tells me she has a new hobby now, which is documenting HOA absurdities and posting them on a community Facebook group. The group has over 200 members, and it has become a place where homeowners can share stories, ask for advice, and support each other when they are dealing with overzealous boards. The narrator accessory that I still wear is the reflective armband on one sleeve. I started wearing it when I began doing site inspections for the city, and it has become a part of my work uniform. Every time I put it on, I think about the confrontation with Kathleen in the driveway, and the way she tried to intimidate me with her clipboard and her small key safe box. I think about the way I stayed calm, documented everything, and used the system to hold her accountable. And I think about the way the community came together to support me and to demand change. The antagonist accessory that became a symbol of Kathleen's corruption was the small key safe box she insisted belonged to the HOA. After she was removed from the board, the new board discovered that the box did not contain HOA keys at all. It contained keys to the Pine City towing office, which explained how Kathleen was able to coordinate towing actions so quickly. The box also contained a burner phone that Kathleen used to communicate with the tow company owner, without leaving a trail on her personal phone. The discovery of the burner phone was the final piece of evidence that convinced the state attorney general to file criminal charges. The weather flavor that made everything more dramatic was the bright midday light that made the boot clamp and warning tag pop. Every photo I took that day was crystal clear, with no shadows or glare, which made it easy to show exactly what happened and when. The lighting also made it impossible for Kathleen to claim that the photos were doctored or taken at a different time, because the shadows and the sun angle were consistent across all the shots. The conflict object that became the visual symbol of the entire dispute was the boot clamp already half closed on the wheel between us, with faces still unobstructed. That image appeared in the local newspaper article about the case, and it became the thumbnail for a local news segment about HOA fraud. Every time I see that image, I remember the moment when I realized that Kathleen was not just enforcing rules, she was running a scam. The neighborhood type that made this case so absurd was the master-planned community where parking rules are treated like sacred law. Whispering Pines Landing was designed to be a perfect suburban enclave with wide streets, manicured lawns, and strict architectural guidelines. But the obsession with perfection created an environment where petty enforcement became a full-time job, and where board members like Kathleen could exploit the rules for personal gain. The irony is that the community is now more relaxed and more livable than it was before, because the new board understands that rules are supposed to serve the community, not the other way around. The HOA name, Whispering Pines Landing Association, is now associated with a cautionary tale. Other HOAs in the region have reached out to the new board to ask for advice on how to prevent fraud and how to implement transparent enforcement policies. The new board has been generous with their time and their expertise, and they have helped several other communities overhaul their policies and procedures. The location, Quebec City, Quebec, turned out to be a blessing in disguise. The city has strong consumer protection laws and a robust municipal code that regulates towing and immobilization services. Without those protections, the case against Kathleen and Pine City Towing would have been much harder to prove. The city transportation department was also incredibly responsive, and they took the unlicensed towing complaint seriously from day one. The narrator job, City Permit Tech, gave me the skills and the knowledge I needed to fight back. I know what requires a permit and what does not, and I know how to read compliance documents and spot inconsistencies. That knowledge was the foundation of my case, and it gave me the confidence to stand up to Kathleen and the board. It also gave me credibility with the management company and the state attorney general, because they knew I was not just making things up or exaggerating. The catchphrase that Kathleen repeated over and over, "You think this is petty, I think this is my purpose," became a punchline in the community. People started using it ironically whenever someone complained about a minor inconvenience, like a trash can left out too long, or a mailbox flag left up overnight. The phrase also appeared in the local newspaper article, and the reporter described it as a perfect summary of the mindset that enabled Kathleen's fraud. The boomerang line that came back to bite Kathleen was, "Your paperwork is cute. Mine has a letterhead." She said it twice, once in the driveway confrontation and once in the parking lot after the board meeting. Both times, she said it with smug confidence, like she believed her position on the board made her untouchable. But when the invoice trail showing suspicious kickbacks to an HOA vendor was revealed, the letterhead became evidence of her authority to approve fraudulent enforcement actions. The prosecutor used the phrase in the charging documents, and it became a key part of the narrative that Kathleen abused her position for personal gain. The trump card tease, I stared at the violation letter and smiled, because it proved exactly what I suspected, was the moment I realized I had the upper hand. The violation letter referenced a parking rule that did not exist in the HOA bylaws, which meant Kathleen was either ignorant of the rules or she was making them up as she went along. When I combined that observation with the evidence from Paula's photos and the unlicensed towing records, I knew I had enough to prove fraud. The smile was not because I was happy about the situation, but because I knew I had the tools to fight back. The trump card type, an invoice trail showing suspicious kickbacks to an HOA vendor, was the decisive evidence that turned the case from a dispute about parking enforcement into a criminal investigation. The invoices showed a clear pattern of payments from Pine City Towing to Kathleen's personal account, and the amounts correlated with the number of vehicles towed each month. The invoices also showed that the payments increased after Kathleen became Architectural Committee Chair, which suggested that she used her position to increase enforcement actions and maximize her kickbacks. The trump card deploy. I show it only after Karen repeats her claim one last time, on record, was a strategic decision. I wanted to give Kathleen every opportunity to tell the truth and to admit that the enforcement actions were questionable. But instead, she doubled down and insisted that the violations were legitimate and that the board had the authority to use Pine City Towing. When she repeated her claim at the board meeting, I knew it was time to reveal the invoices. The timing was perfect because the board members were already skeptical, and the invoices confirmed their suspicions. The time pressure. My phone storage is almost full, and I must back up video evidence before it gets lost, was a real constraint that forced me to act quickly. I had taken dozens of photos and videos over the course of the dispute, and my phone was running out of space. If I had lost the evidence because my phone crashed or ran out of storage, the case would have been much harder to prove. The pressure also kept me focused on the most important tasks, like backing up the evidence, filing complaints, and gathering witness statements. The escalation step 1. A vendor sent to my door to verify parking compliance and provoke a reaction, was Kathleen's first attempt to intimidate me after I filed the complaints. The vendor was clearly trying to provoke a confrontation, and I knew that if I lost my temper or did something stupid, Kathleen would use it against me at the board meeting. The fact that I stayed calm and documented the encounter was a turning point, because it showed that I was not going to be intimidated. The escalation step 2, a second tow attempt after I put them on notice to stop, was Kathleen's last-ditch effort to silence me before the board meeting. She sent the tow driver to my house knowing that I had filed a police report and that the HOA had been instructed to cease enforcement actions. The fact that the tow driver refused to hook up the truck after hearing the police report and the permit issue on speaker was a major victory, because it showed that even the tow company was not willing to break the law for Kathleen. The side complication. Karen tries to call police to add pressure, then backpedals when asked for the written rule, was a moment of pure desperation. When the tow driver refused to hook up the truck, Kathleen pulled out her phone and threatened to call the police. I told her to go ahead because I had already filed a report and the police would want to see the written rule that authorized the boot. She dialed the number, but when the dispatcher asked her to cite the specific rule, she hung up and told me I was not worth her time. That moment showed everyone in the community that Kathleen was bluffing and that she did not have the legal authority she claimed to have. The signature detail, a tiny body camera Karen wears and forgets it records her too, was the final irony. Kathleen started wearing the body camera after the first board meeting, and she told people it was for her own protection. But she forgot that the camera recorded everything, including her conversations with the tow driver and her instructions to Susan to move guest passes. When the state attorney general's office subpoenaed the footage, it became one of the strongest pieces of evidence against her. The footage showed Kathleen laughing about creating fake violations, and it showed her counting the kickback money she received from Pine City Towing. The ally, a friend who works at the courthouse and explains the filing process, was Eric. Without his help, I would not have known how to file the complaints, how to gather the evidence, or how to navigate the legal system. Eric's knowledge and support were invaluable, and he became a key witness in the case. He also became a friend for life, and we still get together for lunch once a month to talk about work and life. The twist: the HOA used a private tow vendor on a public street and the city calls it unauthorized in writing, was the mid-story reversal that changed the dynamic of the case. I had assumed that the HOA had the authority to boot vehicles on private property, but when Eric pointed out that the boot was applied on a public street, I realized that the HOA had overstepped its authority. The city's cease and desist order confirmed that the HOA did not have the right to use a private vendor on a public street, and that all the enforcement actions were invalid. That twist gave me the leverage I needed to demand refunds and policy changes. The showdown location, the tow truck cab window where Karen yells through the glass while dispatch is on speaker, was the moment when the tow company owner heard Kathleen's threat and told the driver to stand down. The driver had the dispatch call on speaker, and when Kathleen started yelling about police reports and permit issues, the owner heard everything. The owner realized that the tow was unauthorized and that the company could be held liable, so he told the driver to leave immediately. That moment was the turning point in the physical confrontation, because it showed that Kathleen's authority was not absolute, and that even her own vendor was not willing to follow her orders when they were illegal. The set piece 1, a gatehouse lane traffic jam scene where Karen blocks cars with her clipboard and everyone starts honking, happened about 3 weeks into the dispute. Kathleen had stationed herself at the gatehouse entrance during morning rush hour, and she was checking every car that came through to make sure they had valid guest passes or resident decals. The problem was that she was taking too long, and cars were backing up into the main road. People started honking, and a few drivers got out of their cars to yell at her. Someone called the police, and when the officer arrived, he told Kathleen she was creating a traffic hazard and ordered her to step aside. The incident was captured on multiple phones, and the videos were shared in the community Facebook group. The videos showed Kathleen refusing to move until the officer threatened to cite her for obstruction. That scene became a turning point because it showed the entire community that Kathleen was out of control and that the board needed to act. The set piece 2, a tow company owner call scene where the owner hears Karen's threat on speaker and tells the driver to stand down, was the climax of the physical confrontation. The scene unfolded in my driveway, with Kathleen yelling at the tow driver through the cab window while the driver had the dispatch call on speaker. The owner heard Kathleen's threat to call the police and her refusal to provide the written rule, and he realized that the tow was unauthorized. He told the driver to stand down immediately and to return to the yard without the vehicle. The driver got out of the truck, apologized to me, and drove away. Kathleen stood there in shock, and I could see the anger and frustration on her face. That scene was the moment when I knew I had won, because it showed that even Kathleen's own allies were not willing to break the law for her. The outcome, a special meeting turns into a recall vote, resignations cascade, and new leadership takes over before the next project gets targeted, was the final resolution. The special meeting was supposed to be a routine review of the audit findings, but it turned into a recall vote when homeowners demanded that Kathleen and Susan be removed from the board. The vote was overwhelming, with only one dissenting vote, and the room erupted in applause when the results were announced. Susan resigned the next day, and 2 other board members resigned a week later, citing the stress and the negative attention. The new board was elected at an emergency meeting 2 weeks later, and they immediately began implementing the policy changes that I had recommended. The new leadership took over before the next project got targeted, which meant that the community was able to move forward without the toxic enforcement culture that Kathleen had created. The funny karma beat, Karen quotes minutes and the actual minutes contradict her, happened during the board meeting when Kathleen tried to defend her actions. She quoted a section of the meeting minutes from 6 months earlier, claiming that the board had authorized the use of Pine City towing and had approved the kickback arrangement. But when Tom pulled up the actual minutes on his laptop and read them aloud, they said nothing about Pine City towing or kickback arrangements. The minutes only said that the board had voted to review towing vendor options and that a decision would be made at a future meeting. Kathleen's face turned red, and she tried to backtrack, but it was too late. The room erupted in laughter, and Tom told her to sit down. The HOA consequence, the HOA must publish standards and timelines to all homeowners, became one of the key policy changes that the new board implemented. The new standards and timelines are posted on the community website, and every homeowner receives a printed copy in the mail once a year. The standards are clear and specific, and the timelines are realistic and fair. The policy also requires all enforcement actions to be documented in writing, with copies sent to the homeowner and the management company. The transparency has dramatically reduced the number of disputes, and homeowners now feel confident that they will be treated fairly. The Karen consequence, Karen is outvoted so hard the room laughs, was the moment when the recall vote results were announced. The vote was 97-1, with only Susan voting against the recall. When Tom announced the results, the room erupted in laughter and applause, and I saw Kathleen sink down in her chair and cover her face with her hands. The laughter was not cruel, but it was cathartic, because it represented the collective relief of a community that had been held hostage by a petty tyrant for too long. The payback vector, a statute citation read into the minutes that shuts the threat down, happened when Rachel read a section of the municipal code into the meeting minutes. The statute said that any HOA using an unlicensed towing vendor on a public street is subject to fines and legal action, and that homeowners have the right to recover damages for wrongful towing. Rachel read the statute slowly and clearly, and she emphasized the penalties for non-compliance. When she finished, she looked at Kathleen and said, "That is the law, and the board has a legal obligation to follow it." The room was silent, and Kathleen did not respond. The statute citation became part of the official record, and it shut down any further attempts by Kathleen to defend her actions. The reflections on the case and the lessons learned have stayed with me. I learned that standing up to corruption is hard, but it is worth it. I learned that documentation is everything, and that the truth is the best defense against lies. I learned that communities are stronger when they work together, and that transparency is the foundation of trust. I learned that HOAs can be corrupt, but they can also be reformed, and that change is possible when people are willing to fight for it. I also learned that the legal system works, even if it is slow and frustrating. The fact that Kathleen was held accountable, and that the community was able to recover its money and its dignity, shows that the system can work when people are willing to use it. The fact that the new board is committed to transparency and ethical enforcement shows that change is possible, and that communities can learn from their mistakes. The story of Whispering Pines Landing and the battle against Kathleen Garcia is now a cautionary tale for HOAs across the region. The case has been cited in legal briefs, newspaper articles, and community forums as an example of what can go wrong when board members abuse their power and when enforcement becomes more important than fairness. The case has also become a rallying cry for homeowners who are fighting their own battles against overzealous boards and predatory vendors. As I sit on my porch and watch the neighborhood, I feel a sense of pride and relief. The boot clamp is gone, the tow threats are gone, and Kathleen is gone. The community is quieter, friendlier, and more focused on the things that actually matter. The streets are clean, the playgrounds are full, and the gatehouse is staffed by friendly attendants who wave and smile instead of checking clipboards and issuing citations. I think about the moment when the boot clamp was already closing and Kathleen started screaming about my guest pass. I think about the dramatic Dutch angle of that confrontation, with the bright midday light making the yellow boot clamp and orange warning tag pop, and both our faces clearly visible and intense. I think about the way I stayed calm, documented everything, and used the system to hold her accountable. And I think about the way the community came together to support me and to demand change. I think about the witness peeking through blinds like it was a show, and the way Paula's photos became the key evidence that proved Kathleen and Susan moved the guest pass. I think about the handheld plate scanner held low with the screen turned away, and the way the tow vendor tried to provoke a reaction before the board meeting. I think about the small key safe box Kathleen insisted belonged to the HOA, and the way it turned out to contain keys to the tow company office and a burner phone. I think about Eric, my friend who works at the courthouse and explained the filing process, and the way he stood by me through every step of the battle. I think about Rachel, my attorney, who represented me at the board meeting and read the statute citation into the minutes. I think about Paula, my neighbor, who took the photos that proved the tampering. I think about Lisa, the previous tow vendor, who provided the invoices that proved the kickback scheme. And I think about all the other homeowners who came forward with their stories and who supported the recall vote. I think about the lessons I learned and the way the battle changed me. I learned that courage is not about being fearless, but about being willing to act even when you are afraid. I learned that justice is not automatic, but something you have to fight for. I learned that communities are stronger when they work together, and that transparency is the foundation of trust. And I think about the future. The community is moving forward, and the new board is committed to ethical enforcement and transparent policies. The playgrounds are full, the streets are clean, and the gatehouse is staffed by friendly attendants. The parking rules are fair and reasonable, and enforcement actions are rare. The community feels like a community again, not like a police state. As I sit on my porch and watch the sun set over Whispering Pines Landing, I feel a sense of peace. The battle is over, the corruption is gone, and the community is healing. The boot clamp is gone, the tow threats are gone, and Kathleen is gone. And I am still here, still parking my work truck in my driveway, still doing my job, and still living my life. The story of the boot clamp and the parking war has become a legend in Whispering Pines Landing. People still talk about it at neighborhood barbecues and block parties, and new residents are often told the story as a warning about the dangers of unchecked HOA power. The story has also spread beyond the community, and I have received emails and messages from homeowners across the country who are fighting their own battles against corrupt boards and predatory vendors. The legacy of the case is not just about one community or one corrupt board member. It is about the importance of transparency, accountability, and community solidarity. It is about the power of documentation and the importance of standing up to bullies. It is about the fact that change is possible, even in the most entrenched and corrupt systems, when people are willing to fight for it. And it is about the fact that sometimes, the best way to fight back is to stay calm, document everything, and let the truth do the talking. Kathleen tried to intimidate me, to silence me, and to destroy me. But in the end, she destroyed herself because her own corruption and arrogance were her downfall. The invoices, the body camera footage, the witness statements, and the statute citations all came together to prove that she was running a fraud scheme and that she had abused her power for personal gain. The community is better off without her, and the new board is committed to making sure that nothing like this ever happens again. The standards and timelines are published, the enforcement actions are transparent, and the tow vendors are licensed and ethical. The gatehouse traffic jams are gone, the boot clamps are gone, and the predatory fines are gone. And the community is healing, one day at a time. Thanks for watching, and I will catch you in the next one.